Here, but first of all, I just want to say, well, welcome to everyone to our July CAN meeting. I'm Ann Coffey, the CEO of CNPE, one of the coordinating hosts of CAN. And I want to start off, as I do each meeting, by thanking you for coming today, because your presence is helping us stay connected, deepening our understanding of what is happening in our community and learning together. You know, CAN is a forum for nonprofit leaders, volunteers, and funders to hear about the most pressing issues and needs of our community. You hear from leaders across the region and experts from the field. It's a place to learn about substantive issues that impact our work and our community in deep ways. This is an open virtual space, and anyone who is interested in helping our nonprofit sector make greater impact is welcome and invited to join us. As a reminder, we will be recording the program portion of these sessions, and the report out and discussion portion will not be recorded. We ask that everyone stay on mute during the first part of the discussion, and that you can put your comments and questions in the chat during that time. We kicked off this public safety series in January. The past 7 months, we've had city officials, the police chief, community leaders, and today the FOP. Next month, we will hear from members from the Latinx community who will share their experience of public safety. We will conclude this series in September with state elected officials sharing their perspective. At the end of the series, we will develop a report of what we learned and the themes that stood out, and we will share that report broadly. In the fall, we will kick off a new theme called The Flow of Funding and Generosity in Our Community, where we'll look at all types of funding that impact our sector and impact our community. And like past meetings, we will start with an opening conversation, then move to the candid breakout groups, where you will have an opportunity to connect and share with other members of the nonprofit sector and have a deeper discussion about this topic. We also encourage you to take this opportunity to meet new people and to make new connections. Our guest will be with us when you return, and we will be able to continue the Q&A and discussion. So we hope you'll stay with us. As you may know, CNPE is committed to ensuring that our programming reflects the diversity of organizations in our community and the people in them. To that end, we would like to make sure we are reaching voices from every corner of our nonprofit social impact sector, gathering insight from their wisdom and understanding their needs along the way. In a minute, I'm going to ask Merv Antonio to put up a quick poll to help CNPE better assess and understand our audience and participants. This key data will help us develop a deeper understanding of which voices we are attracting, and perhaps more importantly, which voices we are not. Rest assured, the poll is anonymous, and any reporting using this data will be in the aggregate only and not contain any personal identifiable information. So we ask that you participate. It only takes a second. So Merv, will you please put up the poll? Just take a couple of seconds to do that. Merv, let me know when you think everybody's had a chance to do that.
We're about 2/3 there, so maybe another 10 seconds or so.
So we started doing this because we really want it. We're doing this in all of our programming now, so we can really see, you know, at the end of the day, who's coming to CAN, who's coming to our program, and who is not. So we appreciate you taking a second to do this. Are we good?
Is everyone able to submit? I was trying to do the poll as well, and I can't. When I click on submit, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I was able to submit. Huh.
No problem. If it works for everybody and I'm the outlier, that's not a big deal.
Sorry about that, Dave.
That's okay.
All right, we'll take a look at that.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like some can and some can't, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, let's not get stuck there. We'll get that fixed for the next go round. Right. Thank you for trying. So I'm going to turn the program over to Anthony Smith, another co-host and CEO of Cities United. Anthony will introduce our guest and facilitate the opening conversation. So Anthony. Thank you for being with us, as always.
Thank you, Ann. Good morning, everybody. It's just good to be with you all again and continue this conversation. We, as Ann said, have been having these public safety conversations since the beginning of the year, and it's still the most important conversation we can be having as a community, as a country. We continue to lose way too many of our people to community violence, and this city has seen its share. We really started this conversation, again, as Ann said, as we saw what happened in 2020 with the murder of Breonna Taylor and the loss of Dave McAtee, and then the high level of homicide rates in Louisville. I think we hit 173 at the end of the year, and was really starting to have a conversation around our role as an industry, as a sector in this, and then also how do we engage those who are in leadership and making decisions around what public safety looks like in this city and in this state. So you all have seen, we've had a number of people on, and one of the conversations that this group has been asking for and wanting is the one with the FOP. And if anybody's been around in Louisville for a while watching the law enforcement and public safety, we know David Mutchler. He's been serving in the law enforcement since '97. And has been active in LMPD, has served as a sergeant, and it looks like most of his time was in the 7th Division. We'll talk more about that as well. Dave has served as the president of the FOP was the president of FOP from 2009 and then to 2014. I believe it's right, Dave, or 18.
18, yes, sir.
18, yes.
Right.
And then now he serves as the press secretary for the FOP, and also is serves on the board for the National Federal Order of Policing as well. So has been around, has been engaged, and has really been a part of the landscape when we talk about public safety in our city and and also in our country, as you can see, serving on the national board as well. So we are, and there's more to his bio, and we'll put the bio up. I just didn't want to go through all that because I know we've been wanting to have this conversation, and I know through our conversation we'll get to know David a little bit more in this conversation. So really just want to start out, we've asked everybody who comes just to help give us their personal vision and definition of public safety, and then how your role in your work in law enforcement and LMPD, and also with the FOP, has been helping you make that vision a reality. So if you could, Dave, just give us your personal vision and definition of public safety, and how your career in law enforcement and the FOP has helped you actualize that vision.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my vision, and I think the vision of the organization, the Fraternal Order of Police, would be that Louisville is able to have a fully staffed police department with competent top-level leadership, so that the officers that serve on the LMPD can provide, outstanding service to the community members that they serve. It's very hard, especially when you have an extreme manpower shortage, to continue to regularly serve the public, make your normal calls for service and the things that the community needs on a daily basis, but also have time to engage in neighborhoods, to engage the folks on your beat that you serve. It makes it difficult. And then of course it gets more difficult when we have other things added in, like we've had this past year with the pandemic and the civil unrest and whatnot. So I think that the vision would be that Louisville could attract the most highly qualified, competent individuals that want to be police officers here in the city. And then we could, as we move forward, have, meet expectations that the community and the community leaders have of our police officers. And we would have people constantly knocking at the door, wanting to come be a part of the police department here in Louisville. And that's how you continue to keep top level candidates in your recruitment pool. As we know, the pool in general of qualified police candidates throughout the country is less now than it was before. There are less people that are wanting to get into this job. We need here in Louisville to be able to take our scoop of those candidates off the top. So there's some things that we have to do in order to make that happen. But that's part of the vision, is that we have the people in place, the officers in place, and the leadership in place, that the community knows that their expectations are going to be met. And I think that's, if we can get into that situation, then all of the surrounding issues with public safety, where folks like you get involved and help supplement what happens with public safety here, can operate more effectively, knowing that the police department and the police officers are handling their end of the business, so that we can, widen the circle of resources available to folks out there.
Thank you for that. So when you think about public safety, you think about a fully functional law enforcement or police department as the first, I guess, the first peg or prong in this approach. It's been, when we think about police, it feels more reactionary than it does preventative. And public safety, in my opinion, this is me speaking, it's more about the preventative and intervention. So I'm trying to get an understanding of why, when you and your vision and LMPD's vision, that we would want to have more of a reactionary approach to this than a proactive approach to this.
Well, I think what we do is, if we start to separate out what the roles of each group involved in public safety are, for instance, the police officers, they're, a large percent of what our role is the enforcement part. And if we can help lower the violent crime, take the violent individuals, and illegal weapons and things like that off the street, so that the overreaching amount of crime that we're having right now is much less, and we can do that, then I think the other parts, a lot of things that have been mentioned about when people discuss police reform, about having social services available when it's really not a law enforcement issue, and having crisis intervention and things like that. I think those can be much more effective when the law enforcement part of it, the crime reduction part of it, is in full effect.
Thank you. As we were preparing just before everybody got on, you were saying to us you want to be able to help people understand the role of FOP and how it's different than LMPD and how are they engaged together. Can you explain us what the role is of FOP and how it relates to LMPD and then the rest of the community? Sure,
absolutely. So the Fraternal Order of Police is an organization that's set up as sort of a tiered organization. We have local FOP lodges, like River City FOP 614 represents officers of the LMPD. And by represent, I mean, it's not just a fraternal organization, but the FOP provides legal representation, legislative representation. We lobby in Frankfurt on behalf of not only the FOP, but work in tandem often with LMPD to pass laws that are good for law enforcement or good for the community. So working together, we can do that. And then of course we have the labor leg of this whole thing, which is the collective bargaining, where we negotiate with the city regarding wages, hours, and working conditions for Louisville Metro police officers. And that's how we come up with a contract, a labor contract. So that's sort of at the local level. And then every local FOP organization belongs to the state FOP, the Kentucky State FOP, and then in turn belongs to the National Fraternal Order of Police. So nationwide, there are about 360,000 members of the FOP. So we don't actually have a seat at the table when it comes to the making policy and procedure for the Louisville Metro Police Department. The city leaders and the command staff decide what the standing operating procedures are going to be for LMPD. So we represent individual officers, and as a whole, as a unit, work with the chief of police or folks from the mayor's office like yourself to sort of help make sure that on the outside of just the police services and what the government does, that we can have a police department that is engaged with the community and can be much more efficient would be the hope. So that's sort of our role. We don't actually get to make the policy and procedure, or we don't get to tell the government, the Louisville, how they're going to operate their police department. That's a separate role, obviously, that they have governmental rights to do that. So we work together on some things, and then they're sort of, it's like if you think of the private sector, it's sort of like management and labor, how they represent different, they have different roles, but oftentimes have to work together. It's much like that.
Are you all city employees? Are you considered city employees?
Yes, the active police officers are city employees. That is correct.
The active police officers what about FOP? The folks who run FOP, are you saying the active police who serve on FOP are city employees?
Correct, yes. So you can be an active FOP member even if you're retired from law enforcement. You can still work for the FOP. You obviously don't work for the city of Louisville anymore, or whatever agency you might have worked for, but you can still be an active FOP member or be involved in FOP leadership. Correct.
So if you're FOP and you're still active employee, you're not considered an LMPD. You're not considered an officer?
Yes, you are, absolutely. In fact, one of the reasons that we have the FOP is to sort of speak on behalf of active police officers, because we have policies and procedures in place, and probably rightly so, where active police officers, there's only so much that they're able to say because they are employed by the city of Louisville. You can't go on social media or go on television as an active police officer with the Louisville Metro Police Department and act as if you're representing the police department and just give your personal opinions and things like that. So there are policies in place for that. So really, the voice of each individual officer is somewhat limited as it comes to that. And so we sort of do it collectively through the FOP.
Okay. Question, you mentioned it, and I think this has been a big conversation for the community, really is around there's been the contract process, and particularly the transparency and the public input and review, or lack of review and input. And why does that, and I don't like why question, but I'm sorry, that's where, what is it about that process that is beneficial to the FOP and to the staff, the employees, the other officers? Do you all find that process productive? And then also, as we continue to move in this way, do you also believe that it benefits the community's interest as a whole?
So when we negotiate our contract, you can't have 750,000 people being involved in negotiating a collective bargaining agreement. And as you're aware, there are dozens of collective bargaining agreements that Louisville negotiates with different entities that work for the city. So basically, the setup is that the FOP has a committee that is the negotiating committee for the contract that meets with those appointed by the mayor to represent the mayor's office and the city at these negotiations. And we sit and work through, what's an existing collective bargaining agreement, how that might need to change, and negotiate, basically, for lack of a better term, until we come to some sort of tentative agreement that would then be taken to the members of the FOP for a vote. And if they approve that tentative agreement, and then of course it was already tentatively agreed to by the committee in the city, and then the mayor would sign off on it, and we would have a collective bargaining agreement. I think one of the things that is misunderstood a lot of times is that the contract is just that. It's a labor agreement, and it involves wages, hours, working conditions. There are no policies or procedures, or things like that in the collective bargaining agreement. Those are things that have to be brought forward by the police department itself and or the city. That obviously, the commanders of the police department work for the city and the mayor. So there really is no way to have a contract negotiation that would be productive if you just opened the doors and everybody was there. It would be almost impossible to do, just realistically, having been part of contract negotiations, and there are other folks here might have been as well. So the input actually, it's sort of roundabout. So according to state law, the mayor is the sole person who can accept an agreement and agree that that's the collective bargaining agreement the city of Louisville is going to engage in with the Fraternal Order of Police, who represents the officers of the LMPD. So the involvement from the community is they get to elect the mayor. And if the community doesn't like the way that the mayor or a mayor is handling collective bargaining, they have a right, obviously, to not vote for that person in an election, or to vote for someone they think is going to handle it in what they consider a more appropriate fashion. So the community has input by electing the officials that govern the city's side of that negotiation, so to speak. If that wasn't.
What role does Metro Council play in that?
So Metro Council, it's interesting because they sort of have the purse strings. So Metro Council, has to decide how to approve a budget, what that budget's going to look like, and where the money is going to go. So interestingly enough, I would say that the Metro Council probably would need to work with the mayor's office during that negotiation period, because the mayor is going to decide, what type of funding is needed for the police department. And so, there's money budgeted for that in a budget. Of course, we know that in the midterm, budgets can change depending on the needs of the city. But basically, as the actual negotiation process, Metro Council doesn't actually play a role there. Now, as you well know, that became an issue, and that's still ongoing. So based on what the state law says, we've asked the court to make a ruling on that issue, because the Metro Council has saying that the ordinance they have in place that they have to approve contracts would take precedent over what the state law says. The county attorney, interestingly enough, gave an opinion that those two could work in tandem. We're not sure how that would work. It's pretty clear from the way the law works is that any state law would supersede a local ordinance, of course, and then you've got federal law that would supersede state law. So we're asking a judge to make that decision so that we just all know how this is going to work moving forward.
So there's been a lot of folks asking for community observers into the process. Would the FOP be opposed to having a third wheel in this conversation and in partnership? I know folks have been asking the mayor's office and it's been denied. Would you all be opposed to community observers in this process? Not all 750 folks want to be at the table, but there are folks who want to, just like you all represent a big audience. There's some community folks who would want to represent the community voice in the process. Would you all be opposed to that? And would you all be opposed to that?
Actually, we would, yes. So the way this process works right now, we actually have ground rules in place where we can't even go talk to our members about the specifics of what we are talking about with the city side of the table, because you have, and a lot of folks don't realize, there are proposals that go back and forth, dozens and dozens of proposals. Here's what we'd like to see happen here from the city. And we look at it and go, well, okay, let's take this and change these 3 things. What do you think about this? So if we open that up to the public, or we go tell our members, here's exactly what happened, or the city goes and tells everybody what's going on there, then we have this, with social media and technology, then all of a sudden there's no there's no way to negotiate. You have the rumors that will get started. We have that already. Still, even with the ground rules that we have in place, we have members that, hey, I heard that this is going to happen, or well, what's the deal with that? And the fact is that none of that really matters until we actually have a tentative agreement with the city that, hey, if the mayor has basically said, I'm okay with this, and I'll sign off on it if the members of the FOP vote that that will be their contract. When we get to that point, then we can take it to our members for a vote, and we can take it to them before the vote and explain to them, here's what the proposal is, here's what the contract will look like, and here's why we think that you should or should not vote for this contract. And then they do that. But all of some of the proposals, this can be a lengthy process. The 2 contracts ago, when we were just coming out of looking at the recession and things like that, it took 2 years to negotiate a contract. So having that as a public forum, or we all know that people are going to go out and talk about what's going on in that room, and it doesn't serve anybody to do that. All it does is start a huge chaotic rumor mill that then people are wasting time and energy trying to say, look, no, these are false narratives. This is not what is going on. We're simply sitting down with the city and trying to figure out what the wages, hours, and working conditions of Metro police officers are going to be. And I think that there's a lot of, based on your question, I think there are a lot of community members who are asking that they have a seat at that table, because I think that people have an unrealistic expectation of what actually is in the contract and what it's actually about. It's not there are no laws, there are no reforms, there are no it's simply a labor agreement. There's no policy that can be had in our contract that says what Metro Police can or cannot do.
But I think though, Dave, I would disagree that there's no policy, because a budget is a policy, right? And what you all are advocating for impacts the city and community in a number of ways. One, what we pay, right? And how the budget is negotiated, right? So that's a part of it. And some of that negotiation is around overtime and the other stuff that folks have had issues with. But also, I think because the police department and LMPD play such a huge role in a lot of our lives, we would want to be at the table, not just because of training and other things, but also because of this piece of it, right? It talks a lot about, which will lead us into a question I want to talk a little bit about, does the budget. But I think there's a difference here, right? I think, this is I would say a lot of folks on this call support unions and believe in unions, but also want to be able to hold people accountable for how they use taxpayer dollars and how things move. So I think part of the conversation and why people want to be at the table and around this negotiation is because it does impact us, and it impacts us in a way that how much of our dollars are spent on this piece of public safety. So I just want to add that to that piece. But there also is stuff in the chat.
Can I respond to that real quickly?
You can, yeah, go ahead.
Just sort of, not necessarily devil's advocate, but I'm wondering if the community is interested in having a seat at the table with the dozens of other contracts that spend taxpayer money.
I think people would want to, but I think this one is such a priority because, again, the impact that it has and on so many different people's lives, right? I think, if you think about the incidents that we've seen over the last couple of years, but also just the incidents that people talk about on the regular and how LMPD is in all of our lives in different ways. I think this is one of the priorities, but I think if the city was to say we're negotiating contracts about how we spend our resources, community has a seat at the table, you would find folks who would want to be engaged in all of those conversations. And I think you would find folks from this room and from this sector who would be interested in how we spend our money on housing. You see a lot of people always talking about housing, how we spend our money on the houseless population, how we spend our money on young people, jails, and law enforcement. Folks are just asking for more transparency. And I think the fight against it is the thing that puts people at odds with FOP, just to be honest with you, is that there seems like there's this wall that you all are protecting, and it does not seem to benefit community at times. It benefits the officers and the folks who you all serve, but it does not feel like it's about community at times. So that would be that's my assessment. And as I look at it from the lane that I play and where I sit, is that this is a priority because of the impact law enforcement has on our lives.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take. I would say that if anybody has the opportunity or has had the opportunity to read current or past collective bargaining agreements, it's pretty clear that there is nothing in those agreements that isn't either already stipulated in state law or that isn't about pay and benefits. So I'm not really sure, how. Again, I think there's a lack of information out there that people think there are things in the collective bargaining agreement that affect the community on a daily basis. And other than perhaps, like you brought up, budgetary issues, there really aren't. And if there are things in there that are, we do have some language that comes from state law that we put in there. And if those things are an issue, obviously those would have to be, addressed with the legislature. So I understand what you're saying, but I think if that were to happen, I think people would be surprised that they would be sitting in some lengthy, boring meetings, not what they would expect, I don't think.
Yeah, but I think you got folks who would appreciate the process and appreciate being in lengthy, boring meetings. Just to be, and again, I think the city and this country is at a place where transparency is at a high level and what community and citizens are asking for. And to push back on it sometimes feel that there's things that are hidden. And I hear your process that you talked about, but I just want to continue to say transparency is what folks are asking for. And if we had all of that transparency, then I think questions would be, to your point, some folks would be like, well, this is just what it is, and I don't need to be
right.
here. But because I don't know, right, and I don't understand what happens, then it feels like things can take place that we just don't know about. I want to move real quick to the budget. We are always concerned about how the city uses the resources that it has. And there's been a lot of conversation, not just around LMPD's budget, but law enforcement's budgets across the country. And I believe LMPD budget right now is about $190 million. And there might have been more added to for overtime this year. Can you help us understand how this budget reflects you all's priorities? And then how do you justify that amount of resources for the community to a group like this or to community as a whole? So one, how does this budget reflect you all's priorities? And then two, how do you all justify needing that much resources to do the work?
Okay, well, so I'm going to attempt to answer that question, but I do have to qualify it by saying that, again, sort of with the different roles with the FOP and LMPD, the FOP actually does not have a seat at the table when it comes to the police budget. The LMPD and the city decide where those funds are going to go and how they're going to be spent, and on what they're going to be spent. For instance, if there's more money put into the budget for overtime for violent crime prevention or something like that, not only do we not have a seat at that table, we don't get asked, just to be blunt. So one thing I will say is that we are definitely pleased that that the budget for the LMPD, that money wasn't taken from that budget. I think it's become pretty clear that we need to do something to attract qualified people that want to be police officers here. And I think by reducing the budget and the funds to do that, recruitment and retention, as well as all of the other things that LMPD has to do, that has to pay for, I think wouldn't serve to help with that. So we're pleased that that the budget wasn't drastically reduced or something like that. But as far as the budget itself, the FOP doesn't really have a role there. That's not our lane. We sort of have to, just much like the community, we have to sort of take the hand that we're dealt. when that budget gets approved, and you know, make our voices heard if we believe that, you know, something different should have been done with that budget. So we're kind of in your seat when it comes to that. We don't really have a major role in the police budget, how much money's in it or how it's used, to be honest.
Thank you for that. And I think part of it though too, but yeah, so I'll let that. There was a question. I'm sorry. I was going to ask a follow-up question, but I changed my mind, Dave, just so that you know where my head is. There's a question in the box, and it talks about prior to the most recent contract. This is from Mark Kerr. Was surprised to learn that the officers in other smaller suburban departments in adjacent counties had a higher pay scale than LMPD. Has the new contract helped to even the playing field?
So by the new contract is the one that was the 1-year contract that was passed for officers and sergeants that's in effect right now.
Yes.
So I think that, yes, let's first of all say that it's obviously when there is an increase in pay, which there was for that contract, or you know, more benefits introduced, that's going to be helpful to be more competitive. The issue really is that we've kicked this can down the road for a long time. And so the disparity with pay and benefits is so large at this point that you can't make that up in a fiscal year or in 2 fiscal years. So it's sort of a decision has to be made that, look, we're gonna have to invest in this process so that 5 years from now and 8 years from now, we are not where we are right now, that we are a competitive agency, that we can recruit people that will come here and not go to Indianapolis, that will come here and not go to Nashville or not go to Charlotte. But it's definitely, I mean, the gap is so wide at this point that it's not something that any one collective bargaining agreement is going to solve, I think would be fair to say.
So here's what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to look at Ashley and Ann and see if this makes sense, right? Because I think there's some questions, and since we have such a small group, instead of us going into breakout groups, we can just open up and do like raise the hand, and folks can just directly engage with Dave. That way we can have a conversation, and I don't miss any other questions because all of them are important. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity to get where you all are thinking about with the murder of Breonna Taylor, Dave McAtee, and the social unrest that we've been experiencing over the last 16, 18 months, knowing that those are not the only cases. So when police-involved shootings happen, what role does the FOP play, and how have you all been engaged since we lost Breonna and the work and things have been happening across the country? So can you just give us what role do you all play, and then also what's the stance that you all take when these incidents happen? Sure.
So from a boots on the ground sort of approach, the FOP has a national legal defense plan. So members that are members of the FOP can choose to purchase through the dues that they pay the FOP to be part of that legal defense plan. So I told you earlier we had about 360,000 FOP members across the country, and all those aren't active police officers also, by the way, but we have about 110,000 active officers across this country that are part of our legal defense plan. And all that means is that they basically pay in advance so that when there is a criminal investigation, which is what occurs anytime we have a critical incident. It doesn't matter if we have a police shooting, it doesn't matter if it's justified, there's still going to be a criminal investigation, obviously. And when that happens, then of course, just like any other citizen, officers have a right when they're giving statements, if they decide to do that in a criminal investigation, to have legal representation for that. So the FOP governs a plan that provides that service so that, the officers it's not like they have to go home and say, okay, how much money do I have? I need to find an attorney. This one's too expensive. They've already paid in advance, and they get an attorney that's signed up to be part of this plan. And so they have legal representation. So that's sort of a role we play, like sort of on the spot. They contact the FOP when there's a critical incident. We make sure that there's nothing they need, that's emergent at the time, and then we contact whichever attorney they would like to use from the plan that can show up to the scene or to the public integrity office and consult with the officer so that they can, just like any other citizen in a criminal investigation would have legal representation. So that's sort of the boots on the ground approach. And then our role, obviously, in discussing the atmosphere in general or these major incidents that have occurred throughout the country is that the FOP, at the national level or even at the local level here, is willing to have a conversation with anybody, not only about these instances, but about, potential changes, reforms, whatever people want to have a conversation about. The only caveat to that is that the FOP won't jump on board with or agree with anything that would bring harm or be disadvantageous to the community or to the law enforcement officers that protect the community. Other than that, we're open to have a conversation about anything. I'm not suggesting that we would agree with everything. I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't like to jump on board with some folks, nonprofits, whatever the case might be, to help move some things forward that might be good for everyone. And we find that most of the time, when you watch the news or you see instances that happen, things like that, those are things that sell ads. So that's really all you see. You don't really see all the rest of what goes on. And I think that, a large percentage of the time, what's good for the community is also good for law enforcement. Not just because they're members of the community, but because those things actually do gel a large percentage of the time outside of, some instances that would happen that would draw people's attention and they get, tons of media coverage and things like that.
What was I see you, Mark, you're coming in. What was the FOP stance on the no-knock warrants?
Well, so here's the issue. There are definitely times when no-knock warrants would have made serving a search warrant safer for the officer serving the warrant, potentially the general public, and potentially the subject of those warrants. But the number of no-knock warrants that were served in this community were extremely low already. And so while we think there was definitely a role for them, there was a place that they would fit that would be helpful. The legislature, took what they were hearing from the community and decided that we weren't going to do that anymore. So, although we still believe there was a place for it, we can still operate effectively without having to do that. It just sometimes might not be as safe. But we have to deal with situations like that before, so we'll move on.
Gotcha. Thank you. Mark, you want to jump in? You're on mute. Thank you.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for being here with us. I wanted to ask about I believe it's the new policy that Kentucky State Police are conducting the investigations around police shootings. And I think, at least in the media, there's been frustration with the timing and the time that it takes to proceed with those investigations. My question is, what's the FOP's view? How do they feel about Kentucky State Police handling those investigations?
So, first of all, I'll say that the FOP was 100% confident in the ability of the Public Integrity Unit to investigate officer-involved shootings. We don't think there were any issues there, and we have confidence that those will be done accurately and correctly, for the community, and the rights of officers would be, not abridged in any way. We also have complete confidence that the Kentucky State Police will conduct thorough and accurate investigations. I think what we had there was that there were some voices in the community that didn't think it was appropriate for a unit within the LMPD to investigate LMPD involved shootings. And just from the way what we saw, I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I think the mayor heard that and made the decision that then we'll have the Kentucky State Police do those investigations. And when we do that, we have to understand if we're asking another agency to do that, then we have to not only respect but abide by their policies and procedures and how they investigate. And then I understand there are some people that aren't happy now with the way that the Kentucky State Police handles that. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. We don't want LMPD to do it, but we don't like the way they're doing it. I'm not sure what we do there, but we're perfectly fine with, we were okay. We thought that the PIU would, they've done it for quite some time, and we think that they would did a good job and would still do that, but we're also okay that the Kentucky State Police are doing it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks. Thank you.
Denise? So your question in the chat box, you want to ask it?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I see you, Jeff.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. As a member of this Civilian Review and Accountability Board, I agreed to serve on that because I thought it was an opportunity to work with the police and build greater trust in the community. Can you tell me how you think those two bodies, FOP and the Civilian Review Board, can work together to help accomplish that goal?
So obviously, I know that some of the policies and procedures of the review board are probably still being worked out, how it's actually going to be implemented, how we're going to get an inspector general for that board or whatever the case might be. And it's sort of like the issue is the overlap, I guess you would say. Like we have a merit board in place that handles those issues. So we have more questions right now than answers. I mean, we work with the merit board. I mean, obviously they're a separate entity and they decide disciplinary cases and things, but with that still being the case, that they're going to be handling those issues, it's sort of like, I guess, 2 lanes at the same time. We're just not really sure how that's going to work out. But I don't know. I suppose if things were to come up or ideas that were presented, hey, this would be good for the FOP and the review board to work together on this or that, I think would certainly be something that the FOP would be willing to do. I don't know what those things would be right now. Perhaps moving forward as the board actually is in place and actually hearing cases, maybe some of those ideas could come forward. But I mean, we're open to that conversation. I'm not sure what exactly, because there obviously it would be issues involving officer discipline, so the board obviously is not going to be able to be public with some things when they're handling those issues. So, but I mean, if there are lanes that the FOP and the board could work together, I'm sure that could be explored.
There's just some follow-up questions before I get you in, Jeff. I'm gonna bring Nancy in, who has some questions in the box to this issue that Denise just raised. Nancy, can you jump in real quick?
Yes, I just wanted a little bit of clarity about how the FOP is currently working with the Merit Board. We were recently participants in the Joshua Janes as observers hearing, and I would like some more clarity about that relationship between the FOP and the Merit Board, because I thought the Merit Board was supposed to function independently.
Yes, and it does. So in case anybody else is not aware, the Police Merit Board is comprised of 7 individuals when it's fully staffed. 5 of those members are appointed by the mayor to serve on that board. And 2 of those are police officers that are elected by the officers of the LMPD to be on that board. So you have 7 total, 5 appointed by the mayor, and 2 that are elected by the police officers to serve on that board as well. And those, they hear these disciplinary cases. There actually is no, perhaps it was a misnomer to say work together. I guess what I'm saying is that, for instance, we accommodate them. About 10 years ago, they used to have a lot of merit board hearings at Memorial Auditorium downtown, and there was obviously some, parking issues and things like that. At one point, they had a hearing that was scheduled, and the auditorium had double booked or something like that. And so we got a call from the board and said, hey, listen, we don't have anywhere to have this hearing, and we can't just cancel these hearings and reschedule them, because these members are, they're not paid members of the merit board. They have other jobs. So they take off work and things to hear these cases. So they asked if they could use the hall, that we rent out, people use for receptions, things like that. And we said, sure. And they came and they said, wow, there's lots of parking. There's a kitchen. This is actually the accommodations are great. Can we just have our hearings here? And we're like, sure, no problem. And they've been doing that for, 8 to 10 years. And I think a lot of people maybe didn't know that, and were under the impression that somehow for the Josh James hearing, it was held at the FOP hall. All of them have been held here for the last 8 to 10 years. And I think the merit board made the decision that, listen, if this was good enough for the last 8 to 10 years or for other officers, why would we change it just because we have a case that got national attention? I think they probably made the right decision there. I don't know how to clarify the relationship. I'm not sure if you had another example you wanted me to.
No, I really did want to know what the relationship was since that was happening there. And I would challenge the viability of doing it there long term because of the changes in our society and what people are looking at. It does look like there's a relationship that maybe shouldn't be there. And also, there are no public facilities for the people who are observing. There's no restroom facilities or anything. They have to use a non-handicap accessible porta potty outside rather than going to a building that could accommodate that. Like their meeting last week was in Metro Hall, and you could use the facility. So I don't think it's a really good facility for the public to participate in a process that I think they should.
I think there was some talk initially of, we're going to need a huge venue. There's going to be thousands of people. Everybody wants to see this. There might have been 10 people that showed up. So I think that, a lot of people were saying, we need to go to the convention center. There's going to be thousands of people. There wasn't. And the people that did show up realized after when we broke for lunch that, wow, this is not what I expected. And again, like I said about the contract, this is really boring. And they didn't come back. It was an interesting thing to watch.
I think the sentiment there, though, Dave, is that even when we host public meetings that should be accessible to all, no matter who shows up and how many show up, I think the point is just make sure that it's accessible. Get your, that there's not many, but if whoever comes into the space need to be accessible to that. I'm gonna move to Jeff real quick. He had his hand up earlier. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. I'm sensing from your comments today and comments that Mr. Nichols has made publicly that there is a distinct us versus them attitude between the FOP and the leadership of LMPD. And I would like for you to address that. Is that intentional? And why is it like that? And
Sure. I think I heard the whole question. So I wouldn't say that there's an us against them. I would say that we are extremely vocal now and have been vocal for the last 10 years about the fact that we need to make sure that we have extremely competent leadership leadership and expectations trickle from the top down in any organization. So, and we have been vocal for years about, for instance, our last chief of police. There were many issues that we brought to his attention, we met about, and a lot of them were never addressed. And so eventually we had to, publicly say, listen, our members don't have confidence in our chief anymore. So at the point we're at now, 6 months in with the new chief, we are extremely hopeful, although hope isn't a course of action. We're hopeful that, that the chief is going to, these things take time, but that the chief is going to, put in place and take care of these leadership voids that we have, so that moving forward, that isn't an issue anymore. So yes, we're voicing our opinion definitely about, in the past, where we think there have been voids in the leadership. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily us against them. It's just that, we have to let people know that, listen, this is a problem. Especially in a police department, police officers have a lot of authority and a lot. Imagine, people don't think about this on a normal basis. Sometimes even police officers, but police officers have the authority to take someone's freedom away. That is huge. This is America. And so in order for those to make sure that we have those officers operating the way we want them to operate and using that authority appropriately, we need to make sure we have the appropriate leadership in place. That's a huge, huge thing. So that's sort of where we're voicing our opinion there.
What do you consider the leadership? Where's the cutoff? I thought Conrad moved up through FOP to become chief.
Well, so he didn't move up through the FOP, but he did move up through the LMPD. He actually retired from the Louisville Metro Police Department as a captain, I believe. And then he was the chief of police in Glendale, Arizona for 4 or 5 years, I believe. And so when he came back here, actually we had that same feeling. We thought this is actually going to be a good thing. We've got a new chief coming in, but he's been here. He understands the community here. He understands how the LMPD works and operates and what the history of it is. So he should be able to come in and take these reins, and this should work out well. Unfortunately, I don't think that was realized. It's unfortunate.
Got 2 more questions in the chat box, and I'm gonna pull people in. Thanks, Jeff. Jill, wanted some more clarity on you want to jump in, Jill? There you go.
Yes. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for being here.
You're breaking up.
Yeah, we're having a hard time hearing you, Jill.
Really appreciate the conversation.
Let me read your question because I'll read it for you. It's a hard time hearing you.
I'm still a little bit
Yep, thank you. Sorry about that. So the question, Dave, Jill, I'm just gonna read the whole statement. Still unclear of how community representatives in the FOP negotiation would not be given. So why? Still can't understand why.
He can read the question.
Yeah. No, I just had background, Mark. I appreciate that. I was waiting for the air to clear up. Can you share more on that, right? Of this whole idea of why, and if there's mostly boring negotiation, then it shouldn't be a problem to allow community members in. So it's really around that transparency again. That's still unclear, and if you can just add a little bit more to it, and then after that, I'm gonna bring in Richard Whitlock to ask the question as well.
Sure. I don't have a whole lot more to say about that. The fact is that we do have collective bargaining by state law. The FOP represents the members of the LMPD in that process, and the mayor chooses who is going to represent the city in that process, and we work together to negotiate a contract. And the people that are negotiating on the city side of the table on this thing are, if they're not contracted, which sometimes happened in the past, but they're city employees. They work for the mayor. The mayor's elected. It just realistically is not, it's just really not really realistic to have entities, other entities there for the process. I mean, I'm not sure any other way to explain it. You know, when there's a contract that's voted on and it's agreed to, the whole thing is made public. Everyone gets to see every word that's in that contract that their elected officials agreed to. So we think, you know, although, like I said, not only boring, but sometimes, you know, it's a long process. It can be painstaking sometimes, but I mean, it works. In the end, the process works. So we're you know, we think that we should continue on as we have, as every other collective bargaining unit in the city does, and continue the negotiation process the way it is.
So part of what we could think about just as a collective here is asking that all of the processes be open. We know there's examples that we've seen folks put it in the box. Austin does it with community folks. So there's ways for us to think about not just focusing on FOP, but all of the negotiation around contracts. And if that's what we want to be as a community, and this transparency is important, it should be, how do we think about all of it? Because all of it, again, is around taxpayer dollars and how our resources are spent and allocated to support what we believe public safety and other services need to look like. Richard Whitlock, let me have you jump in real quick and ask your question.
Hello.
Yes, can hear you.
We heard this is my question to the FOP. We heard the mayor speak of reimagining public safety, and we don't really know what that looks like. But my question to the FOP is, are you all interested in reimagining public safety as well? And what's your point of view of reimagining public safety in the 21st century, especially in the right now in Louisville, Kentucky?
Thanks for that,
Yeah.
Richard. Timely. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. We're interested. Did you want me to answer, Anthony?
Yes, my bad.
Okay. Yeah, sure. We're interested in that discussion. So, you know, when we talk about, there's been a lot of talk about reform as far as, you know, there's a lot of everything that happens in the community that needs a response from the community, whether that be the police or whatever. If there isn't something in place to handle that, it falls to the hands of the police, which is why we make a lot of calls for service that end up being issues that really aren't about law enforcement. And that's, you know, that's not something new. It's happened for quite some time. So we're absolutely interested in finding a way. And of course, that's going to involve, you know, funding and things like that, but finding a way for when the police do respond to things like that, that there's somebody in place or somebody there that could be like, okay, this is something, you know, we triage it. This is something that needs to be over here. This is not a law enforcement issue. And that puts the police officers back in service and takes law enforcement out of the picture when it doesn't need to be there, which allows them to continue to do their job and is more efficient and probably provides a better service for who we're responding to or for whoever called the police. But I think there was a little bit of unrealistic expectation that I know we're doing a study right now, and I don't know if any of that's been implemented yet, but I think not only is it probably not the best approach, but I don't know how many, you know, people that work in the social services are going to want to respond to dispatch calls for service, you know, without law enforcement there, at least at the outset. I think it's great to have them there with the police, or to have them there perhaps right after the police response. But, you know, as we all know, if anybody's ever even, you know, heard some calls into the police or 911 calls, and we even, you know, sometimes joke about it in the police department. We'll get a call that there are, you know, 40 adult males fighting with baseball bats on the corner, and when we show up, it's actually 3 8-year-olds and one of them has a yardstick, right? But we don't know. It could be the other way around. So I think saying that we don't want the police to be there at all is probably not the way this is going to end up, because we want the folks that might actually be doing the responding on the back end. At the outset, they have to know that the scene and the situation is safe for them before they can actually do their work, probably. But if that's what reimagining is, yeah, we're absolutely willing to work, you know, to get our other partners to be able to actually do their role, so that, you know, these things, because law enforcement officers aren't qualified really to be social workers. You know, well, that's not our forte. We're not social workers. We're not, you know, we don't have the resources or the knowledge other, you know, for instance, to homeless outreach. I mean, we can direct people to where a shelter might be, but their specific situation in the long term and how that's going to happen for them, that's not a role that a police officer on the street could even attempt to handle, simply because there wouldn't be time for that. So yeah, we're definitely interested in how this might work out for the future.
All right, 3 questions in the line. One, I want to go to Taylor. Has a question, and I see you in there with your hand up, Tess. Taylor, your question around why police. You jumping in? No. So Taylor's question is, why do the police get to decide if community services want to show up or not? Your response just said you don't believe that community and social service folks want to take the calls, and the question is, why would you all get to decide that?
Well, I don't think that. Well, the FOP obviously won't decide that, but I think that, for instance, the partnership with U of L, you know, going for the study. I'm not saying that we're deciding that shouldn't happen. I'm just saying that if that gets put in place, I think that everyone's going to realize that that's probably not going to be the best idea right off the bat, to send someone's calling the police and we're going to send someone that's not a police officer, at least at the outset, and they don't know what they might be getting into. You know, they show up on what they think is a social services call, and I don't know how they would vet those. You know, what they think is a social services call that ends up being something, you know, that's much different and possibly much more dangerous. So yeah, we're happy to work together and triage those things where they need to go. But I think in the end, probably, I mean, because I don't want to say that, sure, that's great, let them show up. That's less calls for service the police have to make. Well, that's not good for the community either. Well, just, hey, we can have less calls. We don't care if it works out or not. That's not going to be our response. We just want to make sure that however it does work out, we definitely want our partners to be able to handle their area of expertise. Because like I said, much of that has fallen onto law enforcement, and we're not really qualified to do those things, and probably shouldn't be doing those things. But when there's nothing else in place, that's sort of by default what happens.
Kelly, you want to jump in and ask your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
My question was, as we were talking about reimagining public safety, your answer to me was more transactional in that sense. And I was wondering if, to me, if we're thinking about reimagining public safety, that also would involve the relationship between police and community. We know there is a lack of trust there. So my question is, what are the FOP's suggestions on how to repair that relationship and begin to build trust?
Sure. So I would agree with you that whether real or perceived, that there are issues involving lack of trust with the police, which is why the individual relationships with police officers and the citizens that they serve and police, as well as the relationship between, for instance, the department as a whole and the community that they serve, are extremely important. You know, because if someone sees something that happens in Chicago on TV, though, that doesn't look right. Why does the community in Chicago, I'm using them as an example, you know, if from a Louisville perspective, you know, wow, that doesn't seem like the police and the community have a good relationship there. But we want people here in Louisville to be like, wow, I'm, you know, it's not like that here. That's good, because I know these officers that work in my neighborhood, or I know the leaders of the police department and how we're utilizing our police department here to have, you know, trust that the police and the community are working together. So I think it's and to have time to continue to either continue to forge or to build those types of relationships, it requires that officers on the street be able to engage with the community outside of calls for service for a number of reasons. Yes, you can obviously build relationships when you respond to someone calling the police, But usually when people call the police, that is not going to be one of the better days of their life. So, trying to build a relationship at that point, might not be appropriate. But our officers need to be able to engage with the community outside of them taking a police action. Like when you see some of, the for lack of a better term, you see some feel-good videos where officers, in some city will stop and play basketball with kids. They're not responding there because somebody called the police or because there's a violent incident. They're just engaging with the community because they're public servants. So that's why we think it's a huge deal that we can make sure that we have an appropriate authorized strength of officers. Because right now, even if you take away, that for a while officers were working, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week because of civil unrest or whatever. If you take that out of the picture and just normally, when we're 250 police officers short, that's 250. We're not short sergeants and we're not short lieutenants and we're not short majors. Those are all officer positions, people that would be responding to community, that would be on the street. So when you have that type of manpower situation, officers are oftentimes going from call to call to call. There isn't that time that's set aside where they're just patrolling their beat and they stop and engage a community member, just to talk about whatever, because they're on their way to the next run, because there aren't enough of us to go around right now. That's why that's a huge piece to it, I think. I sort of rambled there a little bit, Kelly. I hope I answered your question a little bit.
Yes, somewhat. Basically, you're saying you need more officers so that they can interact outside of calls to service.
Correct.
But
yeah, they
would you
need to
think?
be a part of it.
I'm sorry, just one more follow-up. So
Sure.
part of that, right, if they're responding to service for, calls for service and things of that nature, would the level of treatment and respect that's given during those interactions, how do you think that also affects the relationship between police and community?
I think it's huge. And I'll use an analogy. It's like voting or like an election. They say that any one individual can actually, have an effect on 10 votes. If you know a candidate and their qualities, whatever the case may be, and you go tell your family members who might not, hey, listen, this is who you need to vote for. Well, they might get those votes, right? Because you went out and were positive about that person. Well, the same thing happens. If the police show up at your house or your business because you called them and you have an extremely positive, engagement, they might go tell people, hey, man, the police came, I called them, they helped me out. And that's how those things build. But if it's a negative engagement, now sometimes it's just not going to be, there's nothing you can do if we show up somewhere and there's been a crime or a domestic violence or something and we have to arrest somebody. They're obviously probably not going to go speak highly of the police. We get that. But we're talking about engagements that might not end up in a law enforcement action such as an arrest. We want those people to say, hey, I called the police. I might not have even got the answer that I really wanted from the police, but they were helpful. They respected me, treated me with respect, and helped me understand why they couldn't perhaps provide, the answer that I wanted or the service that I wanted. And if those things, they spread like wildfire. So obviously you want the positive interactions to be the ones that are getting spread. And the way that happens is to have a lot more positive interactions than you do negative ones. So yes, I think it's extremely important.
Thanks. Thanks, Kelly. Let me move on to Tess to do the last question, and then we'll do some wrap up. Tess.
Is it okay if this isn't a question?
Yes, it is. Okay.
Okay. And I need to apologize. I am so moved by this conversation in a not good way that you can hear it in my voice. My voice is quivering. I am shaking. So I'm going to try and be composed, which is something I pride myself in, but I don't think I'm going to do a good job. This conversation has shaken me to my core. I tuned in today because I really hoped that after the last year and a half, feeling very disappointed in what's been happening in policing in our community, that I would find today that I would hear some words and some new information that would make me feel more optimistic about the direction our community is headed and the possibility for positive change that will help ensure that people who are my friends, like Anthony and Ashley and Kelly, are as safe in this community as I am, and that the people in our community who need the most help and support because of circumstances that are often very much beyond their control would be safer. And I am so discouraged right now. I feel like FOP is stuck in a place that is going to hold our community back for a very long time, and in ways that scare me and disappoint me and devastate me. I feel like I'm hearing that if FOP can't imagine change and possibility, then change and possibility aren't going to happen, that things are just being written off before they can even be discussed. I feel like FOP is saying that because they don't think it's interesting to the community, that it's not interesting to the community and it's not our business. I feel like if we're going to improve, we need to do different things. And I feel like FOP wants to suggest that we need to do more of the same thing. Anthony, I feel like when you mentioned that LMPD feels more reactive than proactive and asked how that squares with Dave's vision, that I heard that, well, first we have to get crime and guns under control, and then we can focus on things that require social services. And my view of the world is that if we focus first on social services, the issues with violence and guns will by themselves diminish. And if we keep squeezing tight on crime and making people feel scared and intimidated and afraid to engage the police, then we're just going to squeeze harder on it, and it's just going to get worse. I feel like I'm hearing that FOP has a pessimistic view of a lot of people in our community who are trying hard. And Dave, even in your comment about when people call the police, it means it's not a good day for them, or it's not going to be a good day. How about those people just need help and they don't have somebody else supportive to call? And the one number they call in a moment of desperation, they might need a lot of things, but it's just the number they have. And they just need help. And to predetermine that it's going to be a bad day, and so that we need the biggest show of force there, just feels like it's setting us up for disaster from the beginning. And to think that the way that we attract more qualified people to our community is just to pay them more. What about our culture? What about integrity of officers? What about showing the most competitive and talented police officers or candidates in the country that this is a place where we don't tolerate bad apples and where we have good processes that convey and uphold integrity? And that is what's magnetic. And an incremental pay increase isn't the most powerful thing that draws you here. That is work that, when done right, feeds your spirit and gives you a sense of contributing to and being part of a community. And I'm going to stop there because I just don't even know what else to say, but I just have to say this whole conversation has really shaken me and made me feel more hopeless about this than I've felt in a long time, more concerned for my friends of color and people who live in poverty and have great need in our community than I have in a long time. And it is not an exaggeration to say that I feel like LMPD is operating in a place right now where, as a white woman who lives in an affluent neighborhood and can advocate for myself and has all the connections and privilege that I could want, I am scared to call the police right now. I hope I don't have interactions with them. And if I feel that way, I can't imagine how 80% of our community feels. So thank you for just indulging me. I don't have a question.
No. Appreciate that, Tess. And I'm really thankful that you put that on the table. I sit in a role in a unique position in this moment to ask questions, to get answers. and don't want to be, and I don't mind being, but I know folks know where I stand and know where I sit. And this conversation with Dave was just that. It's like, and I'm glad that you as a white woman on this call said what you said, because that's what needs to be talked about. And that's who need to be having these conversations. Black and brown folks have been saying for years that we don't trust the police, we don't feel protected and served. And now that it's here, having folks like you raise this question in this conversation is important, because we just are tired of having the same conversation over and over again and nobody listening until now. And we're at a place, and I'm just glad that you were able to share how this has made you feel. So yeah, thank you for that. I don't know if you have any reactions to that, Dave, any reflections to that, and if and when you're finishing that, I'm just going to turn it over to Ann to wrap us up and close us out. But
sure. Well, the one issue that I would address is that I maybe Ms. McNair didn't understand what I was saying, that if you're in a position that you need to call the police, it's probably not one of the better days that you're having. Is my point that I was trying to make. Not that because you called the police, you're going to have a bad day. But regardless, I appreciate, obviously, the comments that she made, but I would have to say the only response I have to that is that it feels to me like we were on two different Zoom meetings. So we'll have to agree to disagree.
And
Can't hear you, Ann.
yeah, you're muted, Ann.
Sorry. We don't live as the world as it is. We live in the world as we see it, is makes me think of the quote that I didn't accurately quote, but you get my point. And I think that's really the conversation we've been having today. And the reason we need to bring other perspectives in, because it's very difficult for us to see the world as it really is beyond our own perspective. You know, I know we didn't break out in candid groups, but looks like we didn't need to do it. Tess, I appreciate your bravery. Dave, I appreciate you being here. All the remarks and questions in the chat were powerful and important. Maybe we can figure out how to go to a next place in these conversations. It's vitally needed. We'll continue on that path. Anthony, I really appreciate you always stepping into this difficult space, being asked again and again and again to show up. I know it's not easy. Our meeting in August will be hearing from Latinx leaders about how they experience public safety. Our presenters will be Karina Bareilles, who's the ED of La Casita, and Dr. Laura Escobar-Ratliff, and Professor Enid Trucillo-Haynes from the University of Louisville Law School. So I hope you'll join us again and hear more perspectives and conversations. And thank you for showing up today. I wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you.